Struggling single dad meets mom with 3 kids begging for food. What he learns shocks him. What dark secret could possibly force a mother and her 3 children to beg for food in the pouring rain? When a struggling single dad offers help, he recognizes her from his past, but the truly shocking twist involved the terrifying reason she's on the run, and how it's about to endanger his life too. Subscribe, like, and listen to the full story now to uncover the truth. The hiss of tires on wet asphalt was the only sound louder than the frantic thumping in Will Carter's chest. Rain lashed against the windshield of his beat-up F-150, blurring the already dim streetlights of Pineview. He shouldn't have stopped. He knew he shouldn't have. Running low on gas, lower on cash, with his own son waiting at home. Stopping was a luxury he couldn't afford. But the sight under the flickering Save-A-Lot sign had snagged something sharp and painful inside him. A woman, silhouetted against the drizzle, huddled with 3 small children. They weren't just waiting out the storm. They looked rooted to the spot, drenched and desolate. He'd seen hardship in Pineview, plenty of it since the mill scaled back, but this felt different. Colder, more desperate. He pulled over, the truck groaning in protest. Rolling down the window, letting the damp chill seep in, he hesitated. What could he even offer? Half a pack of stale crackers and pocket lint? Before he could formulate a polite dismissal, the woman approached, moving with a jerky, hesitant gait. Her face, when it entered the weak glow of his dashboard lights, was pale and gaunt, framed by stringy, wet hair. Her eyes, though, were what struck him, wide and dark, swimming with a fear so profound it seemed to eclipse exhaustion. The children, 2 girls and a boy huddled behind her like frightened chicks, were shivering visibly, their clothes thin and inadequate. The woman stopped beside his window, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge. Her voice was barely a whisper, raspy and broken. "Please," she breathed, the word fogging in the cold air. "Anything. Just food. For them." She gestured vaguely towards the kids, her hand trembling. Will's throat tightened. He saw the raw hunger in the children's eyes, the hollowed-out look that spoke of skipped meals turning into skipped days. It mirrored a fear he lived with constantly for his own son, Ethan. But before he could respond, a flash of movement behind her caught his eye. A dark sedan, engine idling silently a few car lengths back, its headlights off. A prickle of unease crawled up his spine. It felt wrong. Predatory. The woman flinched, casting a terrified glance over her shoulder towards the unseen car. Her voice dropped lower, urgent. "He's watching. Please, just pretend you didn't see us." She started to back away, pulling the children with her, melting back towards the deeper shadows of the storefront. The sedan's brake lights flashed once, then darkness. Will sat frozen, the rain drumming on the roof. The image of the woman's fear-filled eyes burned into his mind. What just happened? Who was she? And who was in that car? He gripped the steering wheel, a cold dread washing over him, far colder than the rain. Will Carter knew Pineview like the back of his hand. Every pothole, every boarded-up storefront, every weary face that reflected the town's slow decline. At 34, he felt older, worn down by the relentless grind. 2 years had passed since the car accident that stole his wife, Sarah, leaving him the sole guardian of their bright, curious 6-year-old, Ethan. The grief was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of his days, often drowned out by the more immediate anxieties of survival. His job at the lumber mill paid just enough to keep their small, mortgaged house from the bank's clutches, provided nothing unexpected happened. But unexpected things always happened. A blown truck tire, Ethan needing new shoes, a sudden spike in the heating bill. Each was a potential catastrophe. Will's world had shrunk to the distance between the mill, Ethan's elementary school, and their drafty two-bedroom house on Maple Street. His life ran on a tight schedule. Wake before dawn, pack Ethan's lunch, often stretching leftovers, drop him at school, endure a 10-hour shift breathing sawdust and wrestling logs, pick Ethan up, make dinner, pasta again, help with homework, or try to read a story and collapse in a bed, only to repeat the cycle. Weekends offered little respite, usually filled with catching up on chores, fixing whatever was broken, which was always something, and trying to scrape together a few extra bucks doing odd jobs, mowing lawns, fixing leaky faucets, hauling junk. He was perpetually tired, a bone-deep weariness that sleep never fully cured. Yet, amidst the struggle, Ethan was his anchor, his reason. The boy had his mother's eyes and an infectious laugh that could, momentarily, chase away the shadows. Will clung to those moments, fiercely protective of Ethan's innocence, shielding him as much as possible from the harsh realities of their finances. He wanted more for his son than this life of just getting by, haunted by the fear that he wasn't enough, that he couldn't provide the stability Sarah would have. Pineview itself mirrored Will's own struggles. Once a modestly prosperous town built around the timber industry, it had been bleeding jobs and hope for years. The downtown strip boasted more empty shops than open ones. Young people left for opportunities elsewhere, leaving behind an aging population and families like Will's clinging to what remained. There was a sense of community. Yes, neighbors might lend a cup of sugar or help jumpstart a car, but also an undercurrent of quiet desperation. People kept their heads down, focused on their own battles. Outsiders were rare, and trouble, when it arrived, tended to ripple through the tight-knit town quickly. Will wasn't prone to flights of fancy or intervening in others' affairs. His plate was full, overflowing most days. His interactions were limited, nods to co-workers, brief chats with Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Gable, polite exchanges at the grocery store. He navigated his life with a determined focus, trying to keep his own small boat afloat in rough waters. The memory of Sarah was both a comfort and a pain, a reminder of the warmth and partnership he'd lost, making his current isolation feel even starker. He missed having someone to share the load with, someone to talk to after Ethan was asleep, someone whose presence filled the quiet, echoing spaces in the house and in his heart. He hadn't dated, hadn't even considered it. His energy was consumed by work and fatherhood. He was just trying to make it to the next day, the next paycheck, hoping that eventually things might get easier. That rainy evening at the Save-A-Lot, however, felt like a crack in the carefully constructed wall around his life, letting in a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The image of the woman and children, shadowed by that silent car, wouldn't leave Will's mind as he drove the few remaining blocks home. He found himself checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the dark sedan following. Shaking his head, telling himself he was being paranoid, he pulled into his driveway, the crunch of gravel a familiar sound. Inside, the smell of chicken nuggets, Ethan's favorite, a small splurge, filled the air. Ethan ran to meet him, full of chatter about his day at school. A drawing of a dinosaur, a lost tooth, a squabble over playground territory. Will forced a smile, ruffled Ethan's hair, and tried to push the unease aside. He had his own child to worry about. But as they ate dinner at the worn kitchen table, the woman's terrified eyes kept flashing in his memory. Her whispered plea, the trembling hand, the way she'd glanced back at the car. It wasn't just poverty, it was fear. Raw, naked fear. After putting Ethan to bed, Will found himself pacing the small living room. He couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more, despite the woman's warning. What if that car wasn't just watching? What if it was the reason she was standing in the rain, begging? He went to the window, peering out into the dark, rainy street. Nothing. He told himself it was none of his business. He had enough problems. Getting involved could bring trouble he couldn't handle. But the thought of those kids, shivering and hungry, gnawed at him. Sleep offered little escape. He dreamt of shadows and fearful eyes. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a clean, damp scent. Driving Ethan to school, Will found himself automatically scanning the streets, looking for he wasn't sure what. A woman, 3 kids, a dark sedan. He saw none of them. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe he'd imagined the intensity of the situation. At the mill, the familiar roar of machinery and the smell of cut pine were almost comforting in their normalcy. He threw himself into the work, the physical exertion a welcome distraction. But during his lunch break, sitting alone on a stack of lumber, eating a squashed sandwich, the unease returned. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then typed Pineview Shelter's homeless families into the search bar. A couple of church-run programs popped up, plus a county social services number. It felt like a small, inadequate gesture, but it was something. The real disruption came later that afternoon. He was driving home, slowing down as he approached the Save-A-Lot again. And there they were, not huddled by the entrance this time, but sitting on a low brick wall near the edge of the parking lot, looking even more lost and exposed in the gray afternoon light. The dark sedan was nowhere in sight. This time, Will didn't hesitate. He pulled over, parked, and got out, his heart pounding again, but for a different reason. He approached them cautiously. The woman looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes, followed immediately by suspicion, then weariness. The kids just looked tired. "Are you okay?" Will asked, keeping his voice low and calm. The woman clutched a threadbare backpack protectively. We're fine." Her voice was stronger today, but still strained. "Look," Will said, squatting down slightly to be less intimidating, "I saw you last night. I was worried. Have you eaten?" The oldest girl's eyes fixed on him with unnerving intensity. The boy sniffled. The woman shook her head, a flush creeping up her neck. "We're managing." "It didn't look like managing," Will said gently. "My name's Will. I live just down the road. Can I at least get you guys something to eat now?" No strings attached. He saw the internal struggle on her face, pride warring with desperation. Finally, she nodded, a single, jerky movement. "Okay, thank you." As she stood up, pulling the children with her, something glinted on her wrist. A simple, woven bracelet made of faded blue and gray paracord, knotted in a specific pattern. Will froze. His breath caught in his throat. He knew that bracelet. He made it himself, 15, maybe 16 years ago, in high school shop class. He'd made 2, one for himself, one for his then best friend, the girl he'd shared everything with until life pulled them in different directions after graduation. Lizzie. The name escaped him, barely a whisper, thick with disbelief. The woman spun around, her eyes widening in shock. The weariness and fear were momentarily replaced by stunned recognition. Will Carter? Is that really you?" In the middle of the Save-A-Lot parking lot, under the flat gray sky, 2 ghosts from the past stared at each other, the intervening years collapsing in an instant. The shock wasn't just recognition. It was the jarring collision of memory with the harsh reality of the present. This wasn't the laughing, vibrant Lizzie he remembered. This was a woman haunted and hunted. His initial goal was simple: offer food, maybe point her towards help. Now, seeing that bracelet, knowing who she was, everything changed. This wasn't a stranger's problem anymore. This was Lizzie, and she was in trouble. His immediate reaction was a confusing mix: shock, a pang of nostalgia, deep concern, and a rising tide of protective instinct. "Lizzie," he repeated, finding his voice. "What happened? Come on. Let's get you and the kids somewhere warm. My place. We need to talk." The small house felt even smaller, crammed with 4 extra bodies, but it was warm and dry. Ethan, initially shy, quickly warmed up to the newcomers, especially 7-year-old Sophie, proudly showing off his dinosaur collection, while the other two, 9-year-old Clara and 5-year-old Ben, watched with wide, quiet eyes. While the kids cautiously shared chicken nuggets and apple slices at the kitchen table, Will and Liz sat awkwardly on the worn living room couch. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and years of distance. Finally, Liz began to talk, her voice low and halting at first, then gathering momentum as the dam of pent-up fear and pain began to break. She spoke of meeting Richard Monroe shortly after leaving Pineview, charmed by his confidence and promises of a better life. The early days were good, or seemed so in retrospect, but the charm soon curdled into control, then possessiveness, then violence. Richard was a drinker, she explained, with a nasty temper that worsened when he lost his job. He isolated her from her friends, controlled their finances, mostly gambling them away, and his anger increasingly turned physical. The beatings became more frequent, often followed by tearful apologies and manipulative promises to change. She showed with a faint yellowing of a bruise on her arm, hidden beneath her sleeve. The kids saw things they never should have seen. She tried leaving twice before. The first time, he found her within hours, dragging her back with terrifying threats. The second time, he threatened to hurt the children, using them as leverage to keep her trapped. The final straw came a few days ago when, in a drunken rage, he'd thrown a lamp, narrowly missing Ben. That night, while he was passed out, she grabbed the kids a backpack with a few clothes, the little cash she'd managed to squirrel away, and the bracelet, a tangible link to a time before Richard, a time she felt safe. She'd driven their aging car until it died 2 towns over, then used the last of her money for bus tickets that got them as far as Pineview, a place she hadn't intended to return to but felt like the only option left. Richard, she knew, would be looking for her. The dark sedan last night, she suspected it was someone he knew, hired or coerced into searching. He had connections, she whispered, shady ones from his gambling debts. Will listened, a knot tightening in his stomach. The Lizzie he remembered was bright, ambitious, full of plans. This broken, terrified woman was a stranger, yet achingly familiar. He felt a surge of anger towards the faceless Richard, but also a growing sense of responsibility. This wasn't just bad luck, this was dangerous. His initial offers felt flimsy now. "You need help, Liz." "Real help," he said firmly. "A shelter, maybe?" "The police." Liz shook her head vehemently, tears welling up. "The shelters are the first place he'll look. And the police. He's twisted things before, made me look unstable. He threatened to report me for kidnapping my own kids if I ever left. I don't have proof of the worst of it. It's my word against his." The complication was stark. Helping Liz wasn't just about food and shelter. It was about protecting her from an abusive, manipulative man who was actively hunting her. Will's own resources were meager. He couldn't afford to put them up in a motel for long. His small house offered concealment, but no real security if Richard came looking. He spent the next couple of days in a state of heightened anxiety, trying to act normal for Ethan while his mind raced. He let Liz and the kids stay, making pallets on the living room floor. It was crowded and stressful, the constant presence of 4 extra people amplifying the limitations of his small space and budget. He bought extra groceries, stretching his already thin wallet. He called in sick to the mill for a day, claiming a stomach bug, using the time to discreetly ask around. He spoke to Dave, the owner of the local diner, a gruff but fair man Will had known for years. Saw a woman and some kids asking for leftovers yesterday, Dave admitted, wiping down the counter. Looked like they were running from something. Told them they could eat here, long as they behaved. Will explained, vaguely, that she was an old friend who'd fallen on hard times. Dave just grunted. World's tough. Keep an eye out, Will. Trouble finds people. He also called Mrs. Gable, Ethan's teacher, under the guise of asking about school supplies. He gently probed if she knew of any resources for families in crisis. Mrs. Gable, perceptive and kind, suggested contacting Pastor Evans at the community church, known for their discretionary fund and network of support. Complicating matters further was Liz's deep-seated fear and mistrust. Years of abuse had made her wary of everyone. She jumped at loud noises, scrutinized Will's questions, and was reluctant to reach out to official channels. Her kids mirrored her anxiety, sticking close to her, their initial curiosity about Ethan fading into watchful silence whenever Will entered the room. The financial strain was immediate. Feeding 5 extra mouths, even simply, was noticeable. Will started calculating bills, a familiar knot of dread tightening in his gut. He picked up an extra hauling job on Saturday, leaving Liz and the kids hidden in the house, instructing them not to answer the door. The risk felt enormous. He was hiding fugitives, essentially. If Richard showed up, what would he do? He wasn't a fighter. His protective instincts warred with his fear of confrontation and the potential consequences for Ethan. Yet, watching Liz interact quietly with her children, seeing the flicker of hope in her eyes when Ethan made Sophie laugh, solidified his resolve. He couldn't turn him away. He had to find a way. The first tentative step was agreeing to talk to Pastor Evans. It felt like a huge leap of faith for Liz and a necessary gamble for Will. The meeting with Pastor Evans was arranged discreetly at the church rectory, a small, book-lined office smelling faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Pastor Evans, a kind-faced man with gentle eyes, listened patiently as Liz, prompted by Will, haltingly recounted a sanitized version of her story, fleeing a bad situation, needing temporary help. He offered immediate assistance, food from the church pantry, some donated clothing, and, crucially, information about a women's shelter in the next county, one known for stricter security and resources for domestic violence victims. He also mentioned a pro bono legal aid clinic that sometimes held sessions in Pineview. It felt like a breakthrough, a concrete path forward. Liz seemed visibly relieved, a fragile tendril of hope unfurling within her. Will allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Maybe this wouldn't be as impossible as it seemed. They left the rectory with bags of groceries, information pamphlets, and a tentative plan. Contact the shelter, consult the legal aid clinic, and start rebuilding. That fragile hope shattered less than 24 hours later. Will was at work, his mind momentarily eased, focusing on the rhythm of the saws. His phone buzzed in his pocket, an unknown number. He usually ignored unfamiliar calls, but a gut feeling made him answer. Carter. The voice was male, smooth, almost casual, but with an underlying edge that sent a chill down Will's spine. Who is this? Will demanded, stepping away from the noisy machinery. Let's just say I'm a friend of Richard's. Richard Monroe. Heard you've been playing Good Samaritan with his family. Will's blood ran cold. How? How did they find out? Had someone in town talked? Was it the diner owner? Someone at the church? I don't know what you're talking about. Will bluffed, his voice tighter than he intended. The man chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. Don't insult my intelligence, Carter. Richard's very unhappy. He considers what's his to be his. That includes Lizzie and the kids. He just wants them back home where they belong. They're not going back, Will said, gripping the phone tightly. That's not your decision to make. Look, this doesn't have to get messy. Richard's willing to be reasonable, but he's not patient. Tell Lizzie to call him, or things could get difficult. For her, for the kids, maybe even for you and your boy. The threat hung heavy in the air, unspoken but crystal clear. Stay away from them, Will growled. Just giving you fair warning, Carter. Pineview's a small town. Easy to find people. Easy for accidents to happen. Think about it. The line clicked dead. Will stood frozen, the noise of the mill fading into a dull roar in his ears. Richard wasn't just looking. He had people actively helping him, people who knew Will's name, where he worked, and, implicitly, that he had a son. The vague danger had suddenly become specific, personal, and terrifyingly close. This wasn't just about helping Liz escape. It was about active pursuit by a dangerous man with resources. He immediately called Liz, his voice strained. He relayed the conversation, the thinly veiled threats. Panic seized her. She started crying, talking frantically about running again, disappearing completely. No, Will said, his own fear battling a rising determination. Running won't work. He'll find you again. We need to face this. This was the turning point. The anonymous call, the direct threat involving Ethan, shifted everything. It was no longer enough to find Liz temporary shelter. They needed a strategy to permanently stop Richard. The stakes had escalated dramatically. Will realized, with sobering clarity, that he was deeply entangled. Hiding Liz wasn't just an act of compassion. It was now an act of defiance against a man who threatened not only her, but his own family. There was no going back to his quiet, contained life. The initial goal of providing immediate aid was obsolete. The new goal was far more complex and dangerous. Secure legal protection for Liz and the children, expose Richard's abuse, and ensure their long-term safety, all while protecting Ethan and himself. He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with dread. He was no longer just a bystander or a helper. He was actively involved in a confrontation he never sought. Looking at Liz's tear-streaked, terrified face when he got home that evening, he knew he couldn't back down. We're not running, he told her, his voice steadier than he felt. We're fighting back. The phone call cast a pall of fear over the small house. Every creak of the floorboards, every car passing on the street, sent Liz into a fresh wave of anxiety. Will felt it too, a constant, low-level hum of apprehension. He started varying his route home from work, checked the locks obsessively, and found himself watching Ethan with hawk-like intensity when they were outside. The immediate fallout was practical. The plan to contact the county shelter felt too risky now. If Richard had people watching Pineview, showing up at a known shelter, even a secure one, seemed like walking into a trap. They needed a different approach. Will took another day off work, this time telling his foreman it was a family emergency, which felt chillingly accurate. He spent the morning making calls, starting with the legal aid clinic Pastor Evans had mentioned. He got lucky. A volunteer lawyer, MS Hanson, agreed to meet them discreetly that afternoon. MS Hanson, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, met them not at the church, but in a quiet back booth at Dave's Diner, a place public enough to feel safe but private enough for conversation. Will bought coffee while Liz, trembling slightly, recounted her story in more detail, including the phone call Will received. MS Hanson listened intently, taking notes. Okay, she said finally, her expression serious. Richard sounds like a classic manipulator with control issues, possibly narcissistic traits. The immediate priority is a temporary restraining order, TRO. It won't physically stop him, but it creates a legal barrier. If he violates it, there are immediate consequences. She explained the process, filing paperwork detailing the abuse and threats, providing any evidence. Liz thankfully had saved some threatening texts Richard had sent months ago, and potentially facing him in court for a permanent order later. The challenge, MS, Hansen cautioned, is proving the imminent danger and the pattern of abuse, especially without police reports. His threats against will help establish his current state of mind and willingness to involve others. The lawyer's calm competence was reassuring, but the process sounded daunting. Liz was terrified at the thought of facing Richard in court. Will felt overwhelmed by the legal jargon and potential costs, though a mess. Hansen assured them the clinic operated on a sliding scale, potentially pro bono. While MS. Hansen started drafting the TRO petition, Will focused on finding safer, temporary lodging. Pastor Evans, contacted again, tapped into his network. He found a retired couple, the Millers, who lived on a secluded farm about 30 miles outside Pineview. They were part of the church community and had discreetly helped families in crisis before. They offered a small and used guest cottage on their property. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was isolated and secure, a place Liz and the kids could lie low while the legal process unfolded. The logistics of moving Liz and the children without attracting attention were nerve-wracking. Will borrow Dave's larger, less conspicuous van, just helping a friend move some stuff, he muttered vaguely. Under the cover of darkness, they loaded the few bags Liz possessed, along with bedding and supplies Will had gathered. The drive to the Millers' farm was tense, every headlight in the rearview mirror suspect. The Millers, Frank and Ellen, were kind but reserved, offering quiet reassurance and the keys to the small, clean cottage. Settling Liz and the kids there felt like a small victory, but Will knew it was just one step. He drove back to Pineview alone, the silence in the truck amplifying his own anxieties. Now he was complicit not just in hiding them, but in actively working against Richard. The threats against him and Ethan felt very real. He found himself struggling internally. Was he doing the right thing? Was he putting Ethan at risk? The fear was paralyzing at times. He doubled down on security at his own house, installing a cheap motion sensor light and always keeping his phone charged and nearby. Liz, though physically safer at the farm, battled her own demons. Isolation fed her anxiety. She called Will frequently, needing reassurance. MS. Hansen worked quickly, filing the TRO petition. A court date was set for a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. Richard would be served notice, meaning he would know exactly where Liz was seeking legal refuge, even if he didn't know her current physical location. The tension ratcheted up. We'll try to focus on work and Ethan, but the upcoming hearing loomed large. He gathered what little evidence he could, noting the time and number of the threatening call, getting a brief, written statement from Dave about seeing Liz looking distressed. It felt flimsy against the anticipated manipulations of a man like Richard. Their new strategy was forming. Secure the TRO, use the breathing room it provided for Liz to find counseling and support, and begin looking for stable housing and employment far from Richard's reach, potentially even out of state. It was a riskier, more proactive plan born from the realization that passive hiding wasn't sustainable or safe. The calm before the storm felt fragile, pregnant with the possibility of Richard's retaliation. The 2 weeks leading up to the TRO hearing were a blur of managed panic and careful preparation. Richard was served the papers by a county sheriff at his last known address. The silence that followed was unnerving. No calls, no sightings of suspicious cars. It felt less like peace and more like the tightening of a spring. MS. Hansen warned them this was typical controlling behavior, lulling them into a false sense of security before the hearing. Will drove out to the Miller farm every other evening after work, bringing groceries and updates. Liz was a bundle of nerves, oscillating between moments of determined strength and crippling fear. The kids were subdued, sensing the tension. Clara, the oldest, had started having nightmares. Will felt stretched thin, juggling his job, caring for Ethan, supporting Liz emotionally, and coordinating with MS. Hanson. Sleep was scarce, his nerves frayed. The financial strain was becoming critical. Taking unpaid days off, extra gas for the trips to the farm, legal filing fees even reduced, it was adding up. He started eating less himself, ensuring Ethan and Liz's kids had enough. One evening, Ethan asked, "Dad, are we poor?" The question hit Will like a physical blow, fueling his guilt and anxiety. Was his effort to help Liz inadvertently harming his own son? Richard began his counteroffensive subtly. MS. Hanson received notice that he had hired his own lawyer and would be contesting the TRO, claiming Liz was emotionally unstable, had abducted the children, and that he was the concerned father trying to ensure their well-being. He even filed a counter-petition alleging parental alienation. He's trying to muddy the waters, paint himself as the victim, MS. Hanson explained grimly over the phone. We need to be prepared for him to lie, manipulate, maybe even cry in court. The pressure mounted. Liz needed to testify, to articulate years of fear and control coherently under the scrutiny of a judge and Richard's lawyer. MS. Hanson prepped her rigorously via phone calls, role-playing potential questions, urging her to stick to facts, to control her emotions. Liz dissolved into tears several times during these sessions, overwhelmed by the prospect of confronting Richard. Will felt helpless, able only to offer words of support down the phone line. A significant setback occurred a few days before the hearing. The foreman at the mill pulled Will aside. "Carter, your attendance has been spotty. And frankly, you seem distracted. We need people focused here. It's dangerous work. I need you back at 100%, or we need to talk about your future here." The implied threat of losing his job, his only lifeline, sent a fresh wave of panic through Will. Everything felt like it was closing in. That night felt like the dark night of the soul. Driving back from the farm after another draining visit with a distraught Liz, exhausted and facing potential job loss, Will almost pulled over, almost called Liz and told her he couldn't do it anymore, that she should just take the kids and run as far as she could. The responsibility felt crushing. Why did he have to risk his son's security for someone who, until a few weeks ago, was just a ghost from his past? But then he thought of Ethan asking if they were poor, and the image of Liz's terrified eyes at the Save-A-Lot, the memory of the shared laughter in high school, the sight of Ben's small hand trustingly holding his earlier that evening. He couldn't abandon them. He wouldn't. He gripped the steering wheel, took a deep breath, and kept driving. He had to see this through. The final days were spent gathering last-minute details. Will got a printout of his phone records showing the incoming call from the unknown number. MS. Hanson coached Liz on remaining calm, focusing on specific incidents of abuse and control, including the recent threats. Pastor Evans and Dave agreed to be potential character witnesses if needed, willing to testify to Liz's visible distress and Will's genuine concern. The plan for the hearing day was meticulous. Will would take the day off, praying it wouldn't cost him his job, drive Liz to the courthouse early, meet MS. Hanson, and provide quiet support from the back of the courtroom. The Millers agreed to watch the children. As the day dawned, gray and overcast, a nervous energy filled the air. This hearing felt like everything. It wasn't just about a piece of paper. It was about drawing a line in the sand, facing the monster, and taking the first definitive step towards freedom. The county courthouse buzzed with a low, anxious energy. Will sat on the hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, Liz beside him, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. MS. Hanson stood nearby, reviewing her notes. When the bailiff called their case, Liz took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up, while giving her shoulder a supportive squeeze before taking a seat in the public gallery. Richard was already inside, sitting beside a slick-looking lawyer. He looked disturbingly calm, almost smug, refusing to meet Liz's gaze. The hearing began formally, the judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, outlining the procedures. Richard's lawyer went first, painting Liz as unstable, manipulative, and unfit, claiming Richard only wanted what was best for the children. Richard even put on a show of choked emotion when discussing how much he missed his kids. It was sickeningly effective. Then it was MS. Hanson's turn. She called Liz to the stand. Her voice trembled initially, but strengthened as she recounted, prompted by MS. Hanson, specific instances, the throne lamp, the financial control, the threats, the isolation. She presented the saved text messages. Richard's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, trying to twist her words, highlighting inconsistencies in dates recalled under duress, attempting to portray her fear as paranoia. Liz faltered momentarily, tears threatening, but she locked eyes with MS. Hanson and held firm, repeating the core truths of her experience. MS. Hanson then called Will. He briefly testified about the encounter at the Save-A-Lot, Liz's evident fear, and the threatening phone call, providing the phone records. Richard's lawyer tried to dismiss him as a biased interloper, but Will's quiet sincerity seemed to register with the judge. The pivotal moment came during MS. Hanson's final questioning of Liz. MS. Monroe, why did you flee with your children in the middle of the night with almost nothing? Liz looked directly at the judge, her voice clear and steady despite the tears now freely flowing. Because I was terrified he would seriously hurt one of them, or me, and I knew if I didn't leave right then, I might never get another chance. He told me I belonged to him, that we all belonged to him. The judge listened intently, her gaze shifting from Liz to Richard, whose confident mask had begun to slip, replaced by a flicker of anger. After brief, closing arguments, the judge called for a short recess. When she returned, her decision was swift. Based on the testimony and evidence presented, particularly the credible fear expressed by MS. Monroe and the corroborating evidence of controlling behavior and recent threats, this court finds sufficient grounds to grant the temporary restraining order. Relief washed over Will so intensely he felt dizzy. Liz sagged against the witness stand railing, sobbing quietly, this time with relief. Richard's face contorted in fury as the judge outlined the conditions. He was barred from contacting Liz or the children, directly or indirectly, and ordered to stay away from her residence, once established, school, and place of work. The first battle was won. The immediate aftermath was quiet relief mixed with lingering apprehension. The TRO provided legal protection, but they knew Richard wasn't the type to simply obey a court order. Leaving the courthouse, Will shielded Liz from Richard's venomous glare. MS. Hanson advised continued caution and documenting any potential violations immediately. Liz and the kids remained at the Miller's farm for another few weeks while the next steps were solidified. The TRO bought them crucial breathing room. Pastor Evans Church Network and the Legal Aid Clinic helped Liz access counseling services specifically for domestic violence survivors. Slowly, tentatively, she began to process the trauma and rebuild her sense of self-worth. Will, thankfully, kept his job. His foreman, seeing Will's focus return after the hearing, gave him a grudging nod of approval. The financial pressure eased slightly, though Will knew rebuilding his savings would take time. With the immediate threat lessened by the TRO, Liz, Will, and MS, Hanson focused on long-term stability. They found a small, affordable apartment for Liz and the kids in a town 2 counties away, far enough to create distance, close enough for Will to visit occasionally. Community donations helped furnish it sparsely. Liz, drawing on long-dormant skills, found a part-time bookkeeping job at a local small business, the owner sympathetic to her situation. The children enrolled in a new school, slowly adjusting. The nightmares lessened. Ethan missed having the other kids around constantly, but understood they needed their own safe place. Will helped Liz move, setting up furniture, ensuring the locks were secure. Their relationship settled into a deep, supportive friendship forged in crisis. There was an undeniable bond, but both knew rebuilding their separate lives was the priority. Romance wasn't on the table. Not yet, maybe not ever, but the mutual respect and care ran deep. Will learned that strength wasn't just about enduring his own struggles, but about having the courage to step outside them, to connect, to help, even when it was risky and inconvenient. He saw the profound impact one person's intervention could make. Liz, no longer just a victim, was slowly rediscovering her resilience and independence, fighting not just for survival, but for a future. Pineview settled back into its rhythm, but the ripples of Will's actions and the community's support remained. It was a quiet reminder that even in hard times, compassion and courage could spark hope. The story didn't have a fairy tale ending, but a realistic, hopeful new beginning, built not on sudden fixes, but on difficult choices, community support, and the slow, arduous work of healing and rebuilding.